Michael, to maybe actually speak for maybe 20 minutes or something like that, with providing some frameworks. Is that what you still would like me to do? Because I can go either way. I can right away just give some thoughts.
That's fine. The presentation is fine. I guess it'll give us some people, some of them will like it, and then we can go into the questions as well. Yeah.
So do you want me to provide some frameworks or not? What do you think?
No, you feel me to. I would like for you to provide the frameworks. That's fine.
Okay, so I will start. Actually, I have actually a few slides, but I can do this just obviously from memory. So if you prefer me not to show the slides itself, I will just speak to it, or I can show the slides, and then people can perhaps follow better what it is that I'm talking about. But
yeah, I would like for you to show the slide. I think it's better.
Shall I show them?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try to share them. So here they probably come. Let's see here. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Share. Yeah. And so I have the my presentation here really is for the Y Labs here is on strategic leadership. And I want to say a few words about what it is to my mind and what it matters. As you can see, I have actually put strategic kind of in italics as opposed to in regular type for the others. And that's for the following reason. All of you here that are in the audience, I'm pretty sure, are leaders in one way or another. And so that is tremendously important in our organizations, in our societies, even in our family relationships. It is important, and even for our personal life, to be the leader of our personal life. And there is an enormous amount of knowledge and literature around leadership. What I want to do is try to make the case that it is important to be a strategic leader. And what does that mean? In what way does adding the adjective strategic leadership, to what extent can that help you to become to be a better leader? And so I will, my first slide about this represents 4 starting points that I have developed as a result of my many decades actually of studying the role of strategic leadership in organizational context. And so my first point is, and by the way, again, you can stop me at any moment in time. Michael is responsible for managing that part of the process, as we just agreed. But so I will just now keep going for a few minutes with these points. So the first point, the first starting point, premise, if you want, is that strategy, to my mind, is really a mentality. It's a state of mind and a way of looking at the world. And therefore, this is a continuous process, not something that I do once a year or once every 6 months. No, I constantly look at the world through my strategy lens. Now, then could you ask me, well, what do you mean by strategy? And so sometimes I stand in elevator, I go and speak for companies in different countries. I stand in the elevator and someone might see me and say, oh, hi, and what do you do here? Yeah, I would tell them, look, I'm a teacher here. I come and give some talks. They would say, oh, what are you going to talk about? I go, well, about strategy and strategic leadership. And I might say, oh, okay, strategy. That's one of those words that people use, but what does it really mean? And so I have only a short amount of time, maybe 30 seconds, to actually explain that. And so then I would say what I just wrote here. I would say, well, strategy for me is the thinking that drives action to be successful in competition and collaboration. It's only 5 words, but that's in the end, really, to my mind, what it means to adopt a strategic mentality. And I'll say a few more things about each of those 5 words if we have the time. I have a slide about that. We may not have the time to do it because it's actually, there's a lot involved in each word and the relationships between these words. But so that's my first starting point. Strategy is a mentality. And therefore I should say this, I have sons and grandsons. I actually try to teach my small grandsons, who are only 6 and 8.5 years old. I try to teach them strategy. I try to get them without using that word, but when I observe them, by asking them, well, what's the thinking process that led you to do this? Sometimes it's not even a good thing because your brother doesn't particularly like it, but why are you doing it that way? So I think you can teach this throughout the organization, from young age on. And so that leads me to my second point, because bringing it back to organizational leadership, if you are the leader of a company, the CEO, or the leader of a particular group within the organization, doesn't have to be a company, it can be Y Labs, for instance, then I would ask you the question, would you want the leaders in your organization? And by leaders, I mean people who commit the resources of the company, the people, the technologies, the financial resources, the reputation of the company or of the organization, like the reputation of Y Labs whenever you deal with others. Would you want all of those people, all of those leaders, to have a strategic mentality? Which simply means that whenever they take action, that action is inspired, if you want, or informed, both informed and inspired, actually, by a thinking process that led them to say, yeah, doing it this way, doing this and doing it this way will help us to be successful in competition and in collaboration. And if you do that, if you bring that mentality throughout your organization, you actually turn strategic leadership into an organizational capability. That's my second point. And then the third point is, if you find all of this reasonable, then I would say all leaders must be teachers of that strategic mentality. Now, when I say teachers, I am one for a very long time. Actually, I became a teacher in Belgium, actually, at the university where I had just graduated from 51 years ago. I should probably not have told you that. So I've a long time been a teacher. And what I have learned is that to be a good teacher, you actually also have to be a good student. Because as a leader who can teach, that means that leader has deep knowledge of some areas. Deep knowledge, that's why he or she can be a teacher. But it also implies that there is many areas that we don't know. And therefore, we almost must be ready to learn from the people, for instance, that report to us or with which we have lateral relationship, to learn from them as well, in order to become a better teacher. But in the end, as I said, it is really about bringing that mentality to everybody that is working with you, that you are working with, to all levels of leadership. That is what I mean by being a teacher. And as you probably agree with me that, when you say, okay, what do people respond to most? To what you say or to what you do? My guess is most of you would agree. It's what you do more than what you say. So people will observe that. They don't even know all these buzzwords from business school and leadership, this and leadership that and strategy that, but they will observe, they will know. They will actually know whether you are the type of person whose actions are actually informed by a thinking process that led you to make these actions because you believe that it is in our interest, not just your interest, but the interest of all of us. It helps us be successful when we face competition, and it helps us be successful if we have collaborative relationships with others in the organization or with other organizations. So that's my third point. And then the fourth point is the following. Sometimes people, especially in academia, in the universities, they make distinction between all these fancy concepts like culture. Okay, right? In fact, you could ask, what is culture? And in a moment, I may say a word about it, even though I'm not an expert. And then they go, And then there is strategy. And some people think even that culture and strategy are basically kind of, that they are not really strongly related to each other, because in the United States, some gurus claim at some point that culture eats strategy for breakfast. When I heard that, I thought, yeah, that may happen, because culture is a very conservative force in organizations. But if that happens, that means a failure of strategic leadership. So I turned that statement into: culture will eat strategy for breakfast if you let it. And if you let it eat strategy for breakfast, culture may also eat technology for lunch and the company for dinner. That's not particularly good. Therefore, you want to think not about culture versus strategy. You want to think about how do you bring them together? How do you create a culture of strategic leadership that is a culture within all the leaders throughout the organization have this mentality where their actions are always informed by a thinking process that leads them to try to be more successful in competitive and collaborative situations. And so my fourth point, if you want to remember it in your own words, you could say something to the effect of: strategy without culture is powerless. It's just words, maybe just thinking. But culture without strategy eventually becomes aimless. It is fine as long as the situation doesn't change, like go on autopilot. But what do you do when the situation radically changes? The culture has to change with it. So these are my 4 starting points. And again, feel free to interrupt me at any moment in time. What I will show you for a moment, I won't discuss it all, but maybe when there are questions, I could go back to it. That's why I show you. So I have a very busy slide here that actually shows these 5 words: thinking, action, the relationship between thinking and action. So 2 words. Then success, word number 3, and competitive and collaborative situations. So you could see how I could stay on this for a long time to examine what does thinking really mean? What forms of thinking are there? When is action strategic? How does action and thinking relate to each other? What does success mean? How are competitive situations today different from competitive situations in the past when things were more stable than they are now? Why is collaboration important in strategy? For instance, how do you deal with partners, with strategic alliances, and so forth? So that's all there, and I could speak about it maybe later because I don't want to talk too long. So let's keep that on the side. So then I thought maybe I show you a little framework that you may find useful, which in a way summarizes a very large amount of literature and thinking about strategy. I call it basically the strategy diamond. In a moment, you will see why I call it also strategic leadership culture. But as you can see, in first instance, I have the red boxes up and down, and the blue boxes horizontally, vertical versus horizontal. And these boxes in color, they capture concepts from business strategy. For instance, basis of competitive advantage in the industry can be related to a whole set of forces that we talk about in business school using several different types of frameworks. Distinctive competence is also a word that we use in business to basically identify what the things are that we're really good at. And then we think we can use those, we try to use those things to occupy a position in the environment and develop a competitive advantage with those competencies. And then on the horizontal side, we have official strategy. And we have the actions that are going to help us execute that strategy. Now, these are buzzwords from business school, and people in the regular world usually don't use those words. So that is why you can see that I have translated each of those words in natural language. And I believe strongly that if you cannot, I'm an academic, I write for academic journals. It's a pretty difficult process. But I know that when I'm going to speak with people that are not in my field, in my academic field, I must be able to translate the concepts that I have in my academic work into natural language. If I can't do that, they will be basically useless. So you can see now what I did, right? In the vertical axis, the red boxes, I translated basis of competitive advantage in the industry in terms of what does it take to win. So a strategic leader at any moment in time must be able to identify in that large set of interacting forces, what is it going to take for us to be able to be a winner in that ecosystem of forces? That's what it takes to win. Then the leader should translate distinctive competence in, I call that, what we've actually got. And so then I asked the question, have we got what it takes? Everybody wouldn't understand that. You can ask the salespeople or anyone. You can even go to a bar and talk to people about your favorite sports team, and you can ask them, have they got what it takes? Do they still have what it takes? And you can have a tremendous conversation about that, and you would have a strategy conversation without anybody having used the word. In the horizontal axis, I replace official corporate strategy with what we say to ourselves and to others. And strategic action is what we do. If I would go back to my 5 words there, I would say strategic actions are actually actions that are consequential. Maybe I should say that clearly here. Strategic action is consequential. What does that mean? That means it commits us in a particular direction. Let's say direction A. If we do that, we face a binding trade-off, because having gone into direction A, we can no longer go into direction B. And we also find out if we wanted to go to B or from B to A, that's difficult to reverse. It's actually difficult to undo or do later something that you didn't do, because strategic action is both about what you do and also what you didn't do. So that leads me to ask 2 big questions, that framework. The first one I have already asked, have we got what it takes? The second one is, are we doing what we're saying? And as I mentioned earlier, I actually use this with my grandsons. When I see them play, when I see them have some kind of competition or collaboration, I ask them, have we got what it takes to be successful? Are we doing what we're saying? And if the answer to those 2 questions is no, then you face a very important, Andy Grove, we used to call that strategic inflection point. That's a buzzword too, but it means a period of crisis. Because now that strategy diamond, and you can see these arrows connecting each of the boxes, or the 4 boxes, they are like rubber bands. And so when the situation is no longer so happy, you can see these rubber bands stretch, which means we're no longer having what it takes to win. We're not doing what we're saying. And that can only last so long, because if you let the rubber band stretch until they break, the whole thing collapses. So that brings me back to that box in the middle, which I'm now going to call the strategic leadership culture. That's exactly what I was trying to cover in my first set of slides, my first slide. You can see that I use the word internal selection environment. That is an academic concept. I've used that word in my academic writing. And in fact, the proposition that I have in my academic writing is that the internal selection environment is really the only thing you have that helps you cope with the external selection environment. The external selection environment is a very rough place. And the question is my internal selection environment capable of staying ahead of the external selection environment? And so I translate that into the strategic leadership culture. Whether you have a culture in which the leaders are able to see that the rubber bands are stretching, begin to understand why they are stretching, and then bring them back into a new alignment that is going to be different than the one that was before. But it allows us again to be successful in competition and collaboration. And so my last slide is then, okay, all right. So what would then be sort of an optimal, or let's say a very good, optimal is a very strong word, it would be a really good leadership regime, a leadership culture. And so I'm going to suggest, here is my last slide, but that you can think about that in terms of two dimensions again. And this is not buzzword. One is the capacity to adapt or to change when it is necessary. And the other dimension, I call that debate. And by debate, I mean the discussion among the smartest and the best intentioned people in your organization who are trying to help us cope with change. Change driven by ourselves, I could give examples of that, or change that is actually imposed on us by others. And so that debate variable that I have there, that's in mathematics would call it a vector. It means that there is scope of debate, intensity of debate, duration of debate, quality. There's a whole bunch of things there. But my idea is that actually it's only through debate with the leadership team, the strategic leadership team, that you can cope with change. And so then I've been in many companies and I've noticed that there's sort of a curvilinear relationship between the debate variable and the capacity to adapt. It's curvilinear in the following sense. Some organizations, some teams, you can map your own team. If you're a leader of a team, Michael can do it for YLabs. Where are you on this curve? Maybe you have too little debate. Usually that shows itself when you attend a meeting and someone is giving a presentation, and the person may have 20 slides or something like that, and nobody asks any tough questions. Why not? Well, because Paige is giving the presentation today, and I don't ask any tough questions because next week I am going to have to give a presentation, and I don't want Paige to any tough questions either. And we all happily walk off the cliff together. And then how did we get here? And the answer is, well, nobody ever challenges anybody. And you say, yeah, challenging is impolite. I go, no, you can challenge politely. It's possible, but you must challenge to gain insight in the situation. Another problem is for some companies where there is too much debate. In other words, that's the only thing we do, that's debate. And the same thing keeps coming up time after time, and it doesn't get resolved or not resolved in time. And then the entire leadership the process becomes an internal battle of who is most excellent according to criteria. And I ask them, okay, that's good, great. But are these criteria still relevant in the external environment? For instance, the chief marketing officer will tell me, this is how we do a marketing campaign for YLabs. And I go, yeah, but I am in a different part of the world where we do things differently. So I would have to adjust my marketing campaign for YLabs in my country. And they go, no, this is the way we do a marketing campaign. Okay, fine. So that leads me to suggest my final point here is that, so try to find what the zone of strategic leadership really is between too little debate and too much. And the way you can think about that is to say, all right, do we have, and I use these words here, constructive confrontation, which really, if I go to Japan, for instance, I would not use those words, because if in Japan, they might all say, oh, yeah, but they don't do that. There is no, or in Scandinavia, not so much either. In India, yeah. In Israel, yeah, constructive confrontation. So if you are a global leader, if you have an organization that spans multiple cultures, multiple regions, you will have to translate this idea of constructive confrontation into terms that work in that culture. For instance, I was once in Japan, I spoke about this, and a woman came to me, a Japanese woman, and she said, I don't call it constructive confrontation. I call it constructive conversation. And I said, but that's great if that works for you. Because why do you need the constructive confrontation? You need it to get to the truth in the situation. Otherwise, how do I know what the truth is? How things really are, if everybody hides. And so then, together with that, you want to have a strategic leadership culture where even the leaders who are not fully convinced, but they may still even disagree about some points, but they will try to commit to try to make it work, as opposed to sit on the fence and say, okay, let's see what happens. And so that requires on the part of the leaders, the strategic leader, at least two things. There is more, but the three that I like to highlight are first, insight. And so what I've just shown you, right, a framework like that, which has only 5 elements, but it can gain you insight, because I said the rubber bands will stretch. So suddenly you ask yourself, why are they stretching and in what ways? If you do that with your team, you gain insight. And then hopefully based on that insight, you still require courage. And what does that mean? That means you are willing to take a stand, and because of your convictions, your insights have informed your conviction, and not everybody yet shares that conviction, and yet you must move to action. And that's a poignant way for me to end here with you for this relatively short presentation, because you can be courageous, but you can still end up being wrong. And so I ask executives in many different companies that I've been in different parts of the world, I've asked them, do you think there will ever be some guru, some lecturer, some consultant, write a book? It's going to be a big book. But you can always go back to that book and you find the answers to the problems. No need for courage. Just go to the book and you find the answer. Do you think that's going to be the case? What do you guys think? Is that going to be the case ever? What do you think? Yes or no?
It won't.
It probably won't. Is that good news or bad news? Is that good news or bad news?
It's good news.
Of course it is, because what does it mean? It means there will always be need and room for leaders willing to take a stand, go to action in the face of uncertainty and reasonable doubt. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the short presentation. Appreciate that. Please a round of applause for Professor Burgelman, for that amazing presentation. And I'm going to just, before we go into if you have questions, feel free to raise your hands, or you can post a question in the chat. I'm going to be taking note of those questions. So raise your hands or post question in the chat. I have some follow-up questions for you. It's as if on the framework that you showed, there is a part where you said, an organization requires some bit of mentality of leadership at that individual level, right? And then you also mentioned that there is a need for somebody to pretty much, that capacity at the individual level needs to get to the organization level. And then there's a part where you need to become a teacher of strategic mentality. Yes. And then you now need to become a culture. So given the fact that our fellows are very, very young, how can or what do you mean by strategic mentality? What's that mentality called strategic? I want you to break it down into different pieces. How do I know that I have a mentality of strategy, from a back point of view? And how can I begin to then, imbibe some of those principles into my day-to-day life, the way I live my life on a regular basis?
Yeah, well, that's an excellent question, Michael. And the way that I think about that question is that you are constantly alert. It's an alertness to what is going on in the world. I'll give an example of that from my research on Intel, something I learned from Andy Grove, the former CEO of Intel, a brilliant strategic thinker. In the last year of his tenure as CEO, he told me at one point, he said, Robert, I want you to come tomorrow afternoon to the noise building, which was the building where the organization is, because I'm going to give a speech to my top executives. I said, yeah, sure, if you want me to come, I will do that. So I went and I sat in the back, and there were maybe 40 or so the top executives from Intel, all the ones who were not traveling, they were there. And so Andy Grove, the CEO, looked at them and he said, you know, you guys tell me, all you're seeing exactly, that we have a top to bottom product line. In other words, that we cover from the high end all the way to the low end. And he said, I have noticed that's not true. In fact, he said, you guys have low end phobia. You are afraid of the low end products. And he said, and I have noticed, and then he said, how did he know that? He said, I have looked at the channel data, the distribution of our products, and I have noticed that the low-end microprocessors and the low-end, actually not the low-end microprocessors, the low-end PCs are growing a lot faster than the high-end PCs. And therefore, we need to have a microprocessor for the low-end, and we don't. As a result, shortly thereafter, Intel began to develop a new processor, was called the Celeron, doesn't really matter, to match that. So what did I learn from that? I learned from that if you want to be really keeping track of change, you must actually be very alert to what you would call the rate of change. You know, if you're a mathematician, you would call it the first derivative on the curve. You look at not it is changing, but is the rate of change increasing or not? And if the rate of change is increasing, that tells you that something really fundamental is happening and is going to be a nonlinear function. And if you were not noticing it early, only late, you might be too late. That is an example of what I mean having a strategic mentality. I could give other examples of that. Do you see that, Michael? But that is something that you must train yourself for to do. Right? This does not just come. If you don't train yourself to do that, if you are not developed that alertness, you know, Andy Grove is famous for something called. Have you ever heard that statement? Only the paranoid survive.
Now, can you tell me more about that, please?
Yeah, sure. Now, you know, of course, if you're really paranoid, you are sick, right? That's a metaphor. But what does that mean? That means that you take nothing for granted. I'm the leader today. That does not mean I will be the leader tomorrow. And I'll give another Grove example. So in the mid-90s, when I was actually teaching with Andy Grove at Stanford, Intel was doing extremely well. And the share price had gotten to $100 per share. And so everybody at Intel who was, you know, they follow the stock price and they go, oh my God, look how successful, let's get a glass of champagne, whatever. And Andy Grove sat in the corner looking kind of down. And the chief marketing officer went to him and said, hey, Andy, you know, look at that. You know, what's wrong with our stock is at $100. And Grove looked at him and said, yeah, But everybody who bought it today at 100 wants it to go to 200.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. The fact that I think you alluded to the fact that when it comes to the demand on businesses and demand for growth, like if you're not growing, you are probably dying, and the same thing applies to us as an individual. On a very personal level, right now, you've been a professor for a lot of years, which means that you pretty much have learned to catch up with innovation, to be on top of your game, all through your career. Do you want to share some of your life lessons that you learn as a professor? And what are the traits that you see in your students who are successful, and who are successful in embracing some of the things that you taught them in class? And how do you want this group of YLAB fellows to embrace those ideals that you think that at this age and time, as a young person, as an 18-year-old, I am going to university, what are the things that you want us to imbibe, from some of the things that you've taught us as a personal lesson?
Well, I think it would be wrong, I think, to say that there is only one way, right? In fact, I had a colleague who, is a professor at Cambridge University, right? I won't mention the name, and he's younger than I am. And he wrote a very interesting book, about, I was at Cambridge University in 2009, 12 years ago, as a visiting professor in England, in Cambridge. But that person had written a book by that time, and I noticed that, at the beginning of the book, he wrote about himself, failed in high school. Hang on, man. Here you have someone who is a professor at Cambridge University and who admits about himself that he was a failure in high school. Now, is that a model to follow? No. But what does that show? Never give up. Okay. I grew up in Belgium, and I am of the same age of the person who is considered by just about everybody in the world as the greatest bicycle racer ever. His name is Eddy Merckx. Some of you may even have heard about him. Right? He won everything multiple times. And he's the same age as I. He was a phenomenon. Right? So, people called him, and they called him names because he won everything. So then the doctors, people began to think about, this guy must have something special. Physically, a bigger heart, bigger lungs, some physical standout. They did that and they didn't find anything. In fact, of course, he was a great athlete, no doubt about that, but all the other bicycle racers are pretty good, great athletes too. And so then he was asked, Eddy, what's the difference? Why do you win all these things? There is no physical difference. And you know what he said? I've never forgotten that line. In fact, I was speaking at Deutsche Telekom that was my last trip into Germany for the top management of Deutsche Telekom. And I told him about this. I said, look, Eddy said this. He said, whenever it is uphill or the wind is ahead of me, I try to ride faster. He didn't say harder because everybody has to ride harder. No, faster. Whenever the wind is against me or when it's uphill, I try to ride faster. That's a mentality. That has nothing to do strictly with physical strength. That's a mental thing. That's the difference. Then I try to, I don't make judgments about people. In fact, even grades, I never remember who got a high grade or didn't have a, that's not my thing. But I do have a sense of people who I'll give one example from the school, right? So I had only one first-year student ever who that I agreed to let him do, was a man, a case study, do a case study. Otherwise, I'd never do it with first years. But this person was very compelling. He did it. He wrote a case study about ADSL. If you're not in the telecommunications, but that was a powerful way to increase the bandwidth of cable, of the copper wiring, right? That people had in order to increase the bandwidth. And so, he did that, and he ended up joining Salesforce. He was number 11 at Salesforce. And then later, about 10 years, actually 13 years ago, I can't believe it, he started another startup that is now a leading startup in billing systems. I'm not going to mention names because I don't want to. But so that's the kind of person. He convinced me to let him write a case study. That was something that was in my interest too. And I asked myself, why did I let this particular person write a case study with me, even though I normally don't do that? You see what I'm talking about? And so I don't really know, but I give you examples. Each time these are people that project something that they will continue. They have something deep inside them that will make them successful, even though at some time, they may not, they may have run into some issues or what. That's the difference, to my mind.
Wow. I think that's actually quite summarized it. And I'm going to ask the audience now if you have any questions. Professor Burgelman pretty much mentioned that it's your mentality that pretty much states the difference between success and failure, right? Riding faster against the wind, not necessarily harder. It's about results. If you ride harder, does not mean that you're riding faster, right? It's about results, not about effort. So that's super exciting. Reed, you have a question? Can you please go over your question? You can unmute yourself and ask a question.
Yeah, sure. So I'm heading into my undergraduate degree next month, and I'm quite confused about just what I want to do, because in university I just see that there's opportunities for everything, and I just don't know how to reduce my confusion to understand what I want to do.
Well, so I think what you can do is, first of all, you must in the end make the decision yourself, right? But you can, I think, inform yourself by engaging in a conversation with others that you trust about this particular thing. And you have to listen to what as a result of the questions that people will ask you, you have to listen to yourself and learn from each of those conversations and see how it actually builds. And I will also say that, did I fully know in advance where I was going to end up? I didn't. But actually, it's interesting. I wrote a paper actually based on an idea that I had come up with, years ago, and then Rob Siegel actually joined me to give some examples from it. It's called the minimum winning game. What's the minimum winning game? Well, you set out. Everybody has a maximum winning game. That means, I want to. Okay, in the paper actually, I use the analogy with, like, you want to climb Mount Everest. By the way, these days there's a lot of people who climb Mount Everest, but that's the tallest mountain in the world. And because I want to climb Mount Everest, I go, yeah, great, okay, good. How are you going to do that? Well, I'm going to I'm a strong guy, I'm a smart guy, I'm well trained, everything. I just go and do it, run up. Well, I can predict you may not get that far if that's just the way you do it. And that's why actually there are, along Mount Everest, there are 5 base camps. And I call these base camps, that's like minimum winning games. Some people can get to the first base camp, and then they say, okay, that's not for me. Others can get to the second best game. And they go, wow, okay, yeah. And some, and actually quite a few now these days, they get all the way to the top. And so one way that you could think, I give you this answer in real time because I had not really. But so in your case, I think I would try to, through the conversations, through listening to yourself and what you are enthusiastic about at this point, what you really like, what you would spend time on, even though that might prevent you from going with some friends to, this or that fancy dance or drinking or whatever it is, or something else. You find out what it is that you think you really are good at and like to do, because if you're good at it, you will enjoy doing it. And then you could set yourself a minimum winning game. You would say, let me try that, which is related to what I'm really interested in, what I would like to make a contribution in. And if you can get to that first minimum winning game, that may actually then reinforce your belief that you can actually do this and that this is really what you want to do. And if it doesn't, the effort is basically in a way lost, but it is not completely lost because you have learned that this is not really what I want to do. I think that's the only advice that I can give you. Look deeply into yourself, hear yourself talk when you speak to others, and be surprised maybe that oh my God, I didn't even know that I thought about this or that. And then set a goal that's not too big, but sufficient to give you confidence that you can move further.
Wow, that was amazing. That was amazing feedback. I have Chidera asked a question on culture, but as a lead up to Chidera asking the core question, I want to provide some bit of background. Earlier you mentioned about culture, and you said on the slide on the strategic diamond, you said that culture is technology, culture is strategy, and culture even can eat talent, in this case, on the personal level, right? So Chidera asked a question on culture. Chidera, could you please unmute yourself and ask a question on culture?
Say that again. What's the question?
Oh, Chidera, I'm asking one of the fellows, Chidera, could you please unmute and ask a question now?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, how do you actually build culture? And how do you actually build culture?
How you build it?
Yes.
Through example. And you build it through actually recruiting people that you find naturally converge on the, I would say, the type of mentality that you think is important. But you must be careful not to get locked in, because, one of the things that I talk about when I have not enough time here, but this may be, this is a very good question. If it's the last one, that would be fine. I can probably take one more. But so, yeah, so I do this with intuition, right? Why do you need intuition? Well, because many situations are unclear, and yet we must be able to take action in the face of that uncertainty. So Kahneman calls that thinking fast. And so then the next question is, well, whose intuition do you trust, that thinking fast? Well, then you go, well, that's the people who have shown that they can do it. They have a track record. And I go, man, yeah, that's great. But the track record is always about the past. They were right in the past, but will they be right in the future? That's uncertain. I don't know. How do I prevent my culture to become a trap? And for that, you need what I have called this 20, when I started at Stanford, I've said this for more than 30 years. That's why you need diversity. Right? Why do you need diversity? Because these are younger people from different gender, different ethnic background, whatever it is, come from a different discipline. But these are the kind of people who are going to question your, cherished your beliefs, the things that you believe. Right? They will challenge these. They will say sometimes, Robert, that's not wrong. That's no longer true. And I go, in other words, you're telling me I'm wrong? And he say, yeah, that's wrong. So you want to actually build a culture that has both consistency, that is informed by norms and values that you value, and an operating model that helps you to be successful, and at the same time bring in something that in a way questions that basically, creates variability within that. That's, by the way, my blue and green model, Michael, if you remember that. Right?
Yeah.
But this is not easy because, it's easy for me to say, you have to bring diversity into your team. In other words, people who are going to tell you that you are wrong. That's not the most natural thing for people to do. So therefore, and this is a good way to end, actually, I think, I will say this: in order to get through this potentially vicious circle, we need diversity, but diversity is going to question us and so forth. That can only be broken through leadership. And I would even say strategic leadership. But I will now go and say this. I have been talking about strategic leadership, but there is actually a question that is even more fundamental, which is, why do we need leaders in the first place? And my answer to that is very brief as well. I would say we need leaders to help teams, organizations, to do the things that are difficult, sometimes painful, and they don't happen naturally. It's not the most natural thing to bring diverse people into your team who are going to tell you, guys, you are wrong. That's why we need leaders. And that's why we need diversity. It's a wonderful thing, but it's a strategic requirement to bring diversity into your organization if you want to be able to survive for the long term. That's how you build a culture of both strong values, strong operating model, and yet the capacity to continue to change. And I call that really a strategic leadership culture.
Wow. That is amazing. That is amazing. That is amazing. I think
Thank you, sir.
You just built the strongest case for diversity that I've ever seen or heard, which means that diversity helps you to actually enhance your culture, which means that it could potentially help you to, also innovate better and then improve your organization and then improve the bottom line. That is just fantastic. Thank you so very much, Professor Robert Burgelman, for making out the time to join us today at Wire Labs. Unfortunately, we don't have any much time left. Please, let's give Professor Burgelman a virtual round of applause for taking time out of his busy schedule to be with us today. I do, again, this reminds me of my class at Stanford again, so thank you for the brief 1 hour MBA lecture as well. Thank you so much for your time. We do appreciate your time being here today. I do have one of the senior members and some guests of Wire Labs, like Ian. Ian is a founder of Aspired. Aspired. Ian, can you just say hi to Professor Robert?
Sure.
Hi there. My name is Hind, and I'm one of the founders and CEO of Aspired. And I really appreciate your time and lesson today. We're currently building a social network and marketplace that helps businesses and individuals, businesses easily partner with nonprofits around the world. And in short, basically, you can go to buy your favorite coffee or just anything that you like locally and be able to support an important cause simultaneously. And Michael is my advisor and very honored to be a part of this.
That's great. I wish you great success with it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hind. Thank you. I also have Mahama, who is one of the co-founders of Wire Labs. Mahama, you want to say hi?
Hi, Professor Burgelman. Thank you so much for this wonderful talk. I just wrote down the thing you said about leadership, because I work with a lot of leaders on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it's really difficult work to put them on that journeys. And like Michael said, I think the case you made for having a diverse workforce resonated with me a lot. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Good luck to
Amazing.
you as well.
Amazing. Thank you, Mahama. And I have Paige. Paige has been leading our curriculum team. Paige, you want to say hi to Professor Burgelman?
Hey, Professor Burgelman, that was an excellent strategy leadership course. I think I learned a lot today, as much as probably the students did.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good luck to you too, Paige. Yeah.
All right, then. So thank you, Professor Robert. I'm definitely going to be in touch with you, and I appreciate your time a lot. Thank you so much. God bless you.
You're very welcome. Why don't you just switch me off, Michael?
Okay, I'll do that. I'll do that. All right,
bye-bye.
Yeah, bye.
Bye to you all. Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye. All right, then. Thank you so much, guys, for being here today. Let me try to withdraw code permission. And I think he's been able to be okay. Cool. All right, cool, guys. Thank you so much, Ian, for joining. As Jenny's left. So I think Paige, do you want to take 10 minutes to do the presentation, or should we do it tomorrow? Go ahead.
I can do it tomorrow with them during their feedback sessions. I just want to put in the chat box the link so that they can all sign up for a time that they can meet with me or one of the other members of the curriculum team. And we want to go through and work on finalizing your 1-minute pitch that you guys were supposed to work on last week and this week, so that we can get those out in social media so that you can become trendsetters with your work that you're doing.
Sure. So for your 1-minute pitches, it's going to be posted on Wild Labs page. There is going to be a demo day award for the audience favorite. So if your 1-minute pitch gets the most likes or the most comments on social media, that means that your team gets to win the audience favorite, award for demo day. So that is the point of that. In terms of tomorrow, we have a speaker series at 2 p.m. with Chris Morris, who is the CEO of Yellow Card. Yellow Card is a on-ramp, off-ramp blockchain platform based, focused on Africa and emerging markets. So at 2 p.m. tomorrow, you should have the session, and then we will try to have an open office hour tomorrow as well. Some of you still have a lot of time to spend on your pitch to get it right as well.
Yes.
If you want to wait behind after class to meet up with me today, I will be available to continue the open office hours. So if you want to wait behind, but class has officially stopped today. Tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, we'll have a short class session at around 10. Paige will have an important announcement on your 1-minute pitch. So try and be in class at 10 o'clock tomorrow. We'll probably have a 30 minutes to 1 hour class at 10 o'clock tomorrow, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll meet at 2 p.m. Okay. So make sure that you come to class tomorrow, but also coming to class is not the only requirement. You still have to work on your projects. That is working on your projects is coming to class is the simplest requirement. Working on your projects is the in thing. You are spending time on your project, and that's why we have not had a lot of class in the past week. Because we want you to work on your projects. So I'm going to wait behind for another 30 minutes. If you have, want to meet up with me for office hours, and I can help you with your projects, I can help you with your story, I can help with your pitch, I can guide you on what you need to do. At the end of the day, this is your project, right? And I want it to be that way. So, all right, thank you so much, everybody, for coming to class today. And I hope to see you tomorrow. Otherwise, feel free to wait behind and, let's have a chat around your project.
All right, thank you, Michael and Paige. I'm going to have to drop off for work. Thank you for bringing such an amazing speaker. I think he was great.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Okay, so open office hour starts in 2 minutes. So if you want to wait behind, feel free to wait behind. So yeah.